So I went to start my project for this week so I could record these lectures, and something happened. Apparently the project is gone. I clicked on my project here in my recent linked, and it came up and told me it could not be opened. Do you want to remove the reference? I went to my Visual Studio Projects folder to figure out what happened, and it's gone. So, okay. So this may happen for a number of different reasons. You may be working on multiple computers. You may be working on a computer that doesn't have your project on it, and you're figuring out how do I get it, or something random happened and you lost your project. Well, the beauty of it is that we have actually been saving all of these projects to our GitHub repository, so there's a really easy way for us to bring it back. So I'm going to go ahead and say I'll say no, because I'm hopefully going to bring it back to the same spot. So how do you bring a project back from GitHub into Visual Studio? So the place you start is you start at your Team Explorer. Now, when you haven't opened up a project and you go to the Team Explorer, you're going to get a slightly different view. It's going to ask you how you want to connect. It's going to give you a bunch of these hosted service providers like Visual Studio Team Foundation and GitHub.com. We're not using those, so I'm going to get them out of the way. Instead, I want to use this little one that doesn't look nearly as fancy, and I'm going to choose the clone option, and then it's going to ask me for the URL for my Git repository. So I will navigate out to GitHub. All right, and I will grab my wrong lecture, my web server, and then I want to take this URL that's down here in the lower right hand corner that says HTTPS clone URL. So I'm going to select that and do a copy, come back into Visual Studio, do a paste, and then it's going to ask me where do I want to save it to, and it'll default to probably something like user / your username / sources / repos. For me, I'm going to put it underneath projects, and that for me lives under my profile, documents, Visual Studio 2015 for me, and projects. So I'm going to put it in that folder there, and we'll hit OK. So that's the folder that this repository will get restored to. So I'm going to hit clone. And it says that that folder already exists. Oh, it actually wants me to give it a unique folder name. So we'll call it WSAD-app1, which is what I had it in before. All right, so we've got the URL for the repository, the path to the folder that we want to create as the local version of the repository. So for me, it's users / my username / documents / Visual Studio 2015 / projects / the name of my project. I'll hit clone. And what's happening is Visual Studio is actually going out to GitHub and it's pulling down the entire project and recreating it in the necessary folders. So now when I come back here and I click this link, or I can do it under Team Explorer, I can double click on this repository. It'll open up that home screen and there's a link to the SLN file right here at the bottom. So I can double click that. And that will then open up the solution. So we now have our solution just as we did before. It's come down from Visual Studio or from GitHub and been loaded into our computer locally and then open inside of Visual Studio. So now that we have this in place, and maybe we don't want to break working code that we have, but we want to continue to work on it, what we've been doing up to this point is we've been making changes and committing them or saving them directly to our master branch. And that's been happening without you really thinking about it or knowing that there are multiple branches. But within Git, you have the ability to create multiple branches. And the easiest way to do it within Visual Studio is actually come down to the blue status bar at the bottom and you'll see master. And it has this little forking arrow icon that's to represent branching. So if we click on that, we'll get a series of different options. We have new branch, manage branches, and view history. Now I'll work from the bottom up. So view history allows you to go back and look at the history of all your prior commits to the project. And even though I brought this down from GitHub, all of that history data came with it from GitHub. And every time we do a sync or a push up to GitHub, those changes also get pushed. All that history gets pushed up to GitHub. So that's how you can kind of view that. You can even click here, you can right click, you can say view commit details, which will bring out which files were committed during that change. So you can actually jump into a particular file then, and you can look at the code at the time, and it'll compare it with your working copy versus what you're seeing from the history. So you can actually diff and look at what did I have in that commit versus what do I have now if you need to bring back old code. So that's a nice little thing. You can do larger modifications such as reverts. So if you want to bring back an entire version of your project, so let's say you were working on it for a while and you just really hosed it up, you can come back into this history, you can choose revert, and then you can revert back to that particular version of the project. So that's a nice thing. Another alternative, though, is you can manage branches and create multiple branches. And when you do branching, what you're essentially doing is you're making copies of your project, and then you're working on those projects. Now, you would normally think of doing that as creating an actual folder copy. Well, within Git, doing a branch is a lot more lightweight, and it's almost better managed because you don't create multiple folders, you don't have multiple copies laying around so you can get confused by. Instead, what happens is that when you create a new branch, you do a process called a checkout, and that checkout actually takes all the files that are currently in your project folder and it deletes them for that branch and then loads a whole new set of files for a different branch. And I'll show you what that looks like. Now, if we want to create a new branch or create a copy of our project to work on, you can again come down to the status bar and click new branch. And what it'll ask you is, what branch do you want to create? What's the name of the branch? So we'll call this module 7, and I'm going to pull from my local master branch. And then I have a checkbox here that says check out branch. So after the branch is created, it'll go ahead and check out that branch, which means that it's going to put me into that branch so that I can work. So I'll say create branch. And you'll see here that I now have a new branch called module 7, and it's black, so it's bold. And I can switch between the branches by simply double clicking on which branch I want to be in. I can also do that same switching down here, and it does the same task. So I'm in module 7. Now if we go back to the Solution Explorer, you're going to be like, it didn't change, everything looks exactly the same. And that's kind of the goal. Everything should look exactly the same because we've made a copy of that branch. All right, so now that I have my module 7 branch, I can go ahead and begin working in this branch without worrying about making mistakes or messing up my master copy. So we can do things like go into, I don't know, the app data folder, let's say, and if we needed to do something really crazy, we could delete our database, and we'll make that delete, and then we can go to our Team Explorer, and we can commit that change. I deleted the database, and I'll go ahead and commit that. Now, that was a really bad thing to do, especially considering the way we are with our project. So if I open up the file view of my project, I can jump in here and I can go to app data, and I'll see that I'm missing my MDF file now. But here's what's neat. If I go back here and I switch to my master branch, that updates my folder view, and it actually brings back that MDF, because in my module 7 branch, after I did the commit, I committed and deleted my MDF, but in my master branch, I did not. So I'm able to actually switch back and forth between branches, and I'll see files appear and disappear. So let me actually slide this over. I'll switch back to module 7, and we'll see the files disappear. So that's kind of the beauty of working with Git and creating branches. So if I really messed up this module 7 branch, I don't have to worry so much, because while there was work that I was doing and things were being changed, I still have a good copy in my master branch that will remain safe and working. So that's the idea behind branching. So in this case, module 7, I just deleted something. So let's go ahead and bring back our MDF files. So I'm going to jump back here, and this was my last commit, which was I deleted the database. And then I have module 5 here, which is my master branch. So I can right click here and I can say to revert back to that branch. And I'm reverting my module 7 branch back to where my master is. And doing that revert says, hey, there's a series of changes that are going to happen with that revert. One of them being I have the files that I deleted. So it says right now, it says editing on source, deleted from target. And what I want to do is I want to keep this file from the source. The same with this file, I want to keep it from the source, from that master branch, and the same with this, I want to keep that file. So I'm now bringing those files back, and then I can commit my revert, and I can say restoring database. And I will commit. So you have to do a commit after you do a revert. And we're still in the module 7 branch. And there is my MDF file. So that just demonstrated how to do a branch, how to break a branch by deleting your database, and then going back and then pulling from the history and how to restore back from an old version of your commit to make sure that you've got files that you need. And then we could have done the same thing with a C# file or any other type of document, and we could have even done a diff and brought back just specific changes. So they have a lot of flexibility there, but that's the idea of doing branches, and then later we'll talk about doing merges. Now, keep this in mind that this is ideal to create these branches along the way, and then we'll talk about taking that branch with changes and then putting them back into the master, and that's the merge process that we'll talk about at the end.